Shabbat Shalom again. Nice to be together, and nice to hear your voices raised in prayer. I want to give a special welcome to Rabbi David Abramson, who's here with us. Rabbi Abramson was noted in the speech, but as his former rabbi, and he's also a colleague of mine and a friend. He now is a therapist in the area, and it's nice to have he and his entire family with us. Thanks. And the other thing is, Oliver, I don't know if you want another job, but I think you could either be a Torah reader here, or you could be an assistant chazan, or you could speak every other week. Literally, you made me think, should I give a sermon this morning after? But I want you to listen carefully, because actually one of the scholarly sources that you brought was Dr. Ismar Shorsh. Rabbi Shorsh was a teacher of mine, and truly one of the most influential teachers that I had when I was a student at Jewish Theological Seminary, and I continue to read his writings. And I'm also going to use him as one of the sources in my sermon, so you got to check into this, okay? There are a few big questions I want to talk about this morning. As we began the reading of the Torah, I wanted us to look not only at the particulars of the Genesis story, but rather, and perhaps as importantly or more importantly, what is the bigger vision of this? What's the larger view that we should take about this? What about it remains a truth? Why do we continue, or should we continue to read it over and again? Does it teach us anything that makes a difference? And those of you who know me as a rabbi know that this is fundamental to my Torah, to my teaching. The words we read in our conversations have to make a difference. The second question is related, and that is there something in this story that makes us unique, the Jewish people? Do we need this this Torah because it keeps us separate and frankly subject to all sorts of difficulties and challenges? We know that the majority of this nation, the Christian world, holds on to this same creation story. And the Islamic world also has its creation story. So what makes the Jewish reading of this story either special or unique? So moving away from that for a moment, from Breshit, from Genesis, to something more contemporary, I'm sure that you have heard about the Human Genome Project, which was done about 20 years ago. And the information that was received from its research, which continues to teach, and it's used in so many different ways by modern medicine and science. I will begin by saying it's really beyond me to fully understand. But this is what I want to mention. First of all, the Human Genome Project is one of the great scientific feats of history. The project was a voyage of biological discovery led by an international group of researchers looking to comprehensively study DNA of a select set of organisms. Launched in October 1990, completed in April 2003, the Human Genome Project's signature accomplishment, generating the first sequence of the human genome, provided fundamental information about the human blueprint, which has since accelerated the study of human biology and certainly has improved the practice of medicine and the potentials for our own healthy futures. So what does it mean for us? What can be gained from a religious perspective? And what can it contribute to religious understanding? So my thought about this was enriched by two different scholars. One is Yuval Harari of Cambridge, and a very influential teacher, as I mentioned, of mine, Rabbi Ismar Shorsh. So please stay with me as I introduce a speck of some of the science. I have to get some water, 1 second. No more than 0.01% of our gene pool determines our external appearance, the basis on which we make racial distinctions. In contrast, many thousands of our 80,000 genes combined to produce such traits as intelligence, artistic talent, and social skills. Truth be told, Homo sapiens have not been around long enough to diverge all that greatly, genetically. Apparently, our ancestors originated in Africa between 100 and 200,000 years ago. And when they migrated in small numbers to settle on other continents, they carried with them, in fact, a very limited amount of genetic variation. So the consequence is that we humans are remarkably similar, homogeneous. In other words, racial distinctions are artifacts of culture and not nature. Think about that. Think about how much misbegotten effort has been expanded over the past century and a half to ground prejudices in science, or how much harm we've inflicted on those who were deemed to be different and therefore inferior. As Jews, we experienced it from the Nazis. The Nazis borrowed from false scientific research of a century earlier to show that Jews were a distinct race. Both our morphology, the shapes of our heads, our noses, they all indicated that we were an inferior people. And it contributed greatly to anti-Semitism and ultimately helped make the Holocaust its reality. An entire population was convinced of Jewish racial inferiority. But it certainly didn't stop with the Nazis and the Jews, or even begin there. For white people inflicted the same sentiment on black people. Racially, what separates people is literally only skin deep. It's not in the genome. What unites us is essential, and what unites us is pervasive. So going back to the days of colonialism and slavery, the assaults on so many freedoms by Bible-reading folks, by fundamentalists and creationists, have created so much conflict, and they used it to justify so much oppression and hatred. So what I want to do this morning is to take the challenge of the genome research, racial thinking, and racism to show something that our tradition has appreciated for a very long time. First of all, I will say that in our tradition, science is an ally, not a threat, because it enhances our awareness of truth and God's grandeur. In this instance, with the Genome Project, science dramatically reinforces the unity of the human family. And this is enunciated in the opening chapters of the Torah and exquisitely elaborated by the rabbis. Let me go a little bit further. The rabbis taught from the Torah. Now, the rabbis took this from the Torah. There's nothing that can be more self-evident about explaining human diversity than the fact that we all come from one ancestor. So here, many of you may be familiar with the rabbinic texts, but they need repetition. I know I spoke about them over the High Holy Days. And I'm sure that's why we read and reread the same texts over and over. The fact that the rabbis took one message of the story to be, we all, every human being, come from a single ancestor. And the implications then are clear. No one can say my ancestor is greater than yours. What's phenomenal about this, beyond its essence, is that it's deeply rooted in this tradition which we inherited from the Bible and from the rabbis of 2,000 years ago. And although we might be familiar with the text, it always needs our attention. We cannot be chauvinists about race. We cannot be chauvinists about our faith system. We cannot be chauvinists about who we are, nor can we accept the chauvinism in others. And we learn that then when we think about what the Genome Project teaches us about human beings. We learn it also from the Torah, and they reinforce each other. And the fact that the Bible teaches that we come from one common ancestor, one couple, it tells us something about the value, or we might say the ultimate value of every human being. We're living in a world where human life is so cheap. When war is an evening spectacle on the news, as bodies continue to be buried in mass graves and we witness the wholesale bombings of towns and neighborhoods. We're living in a world where automatic weapons are sold to teenagers and children are gunned down in our schools. But yet, we must be able to express that which comes from a tradition and affirm that we have to live our lives and make our decisions with a sense that it is life that has ultimate value, that every human being has dignity. And we can never give up on that vision. This is what's referred to as a moral imagination about life that we have. It's about our lives and the lives of everyone else. Life has ultimate value. And so we continually repeat this story of creation. And add to that, in the creation story, which doesn't distinguish between being Jewish or not being Jewish, it doesn't distinguish between a white person or a brown person or a black person or a yellow person or a red person. We're taught that every human being contains a spark of divinity. And I mean every human being. For that's what the ancient story of Genesis teaches us. Male and female, he created them. In the image of God, he created them. So we learn that every human being has ultimate worth, equal value, and at the same time, unique individuality. Imagine if our lawmakers, or particularly our politicians, lived with a sense of that moral imagination before them as they make decisions. But here's where I think the most powerful notion of all is coming. The rabbinic text about the ultimate value of every human being, because of our uniqueness and reflection of God's presence, the fact that the human being was made from the dust of the earth, the dust that came from every corner of the world and was of every different color, this universal vision of this, which comes from the rabbinic texts, which is really outstanding, was developed by a group of people, a group of rabbis who were actually destroyed in their land, who were tortured because of their difference, who were killed because of their Torah. They lost their lives, they lost their land, they lost their holy temple. And yet, they didn't divert from their statement of values. It did not allow them to excise themselves from humanity. They did not follow the urge to separate from the world or neglect human responsibility. The defeat of the ancient Hebrew people and the rabbis, which brought death and humiliation, did not compromise their ideals of a theological universalism. They believed in humanity, and they held that in the front of their vision. And they knew that they would continue as a people if they continued their Torah, if they continued their ideas, if they continued their values. And what they knew is reflected in the Genome Project. And so we continue to read this ancient text, and we continue to learn from science. And at the end of the day, when there's a truth, they'll support each other. And the pursuit of truth should reinforce the values that define us. This is a transcendent idea. It's a holy truth about ourselves as Jewish people, and all of our human brothers and sisters. And we recognize that it has to transcend race, nationalism, gender, and ideology. And I think it may be the essence and the holiness of who and what we are as people and as a particular people. And we continue to hold on to it. We continue to read it. We continue to study it. And we continue to take its aspirations to help us help make the world a better place for all people. Shabbat Shalom. Page 1.